Welcome back to the Deeply Rested podcast. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to give a shout out to Anne-Marie Miner, who recently left us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Anne-Marie says, "This podcast is just what my over-functioning entrepreneurial heart needed. It's a thoughtful and refreshing take on how to run a small business without selling your soul, your energy, all your hours, and your joy to capitalism." Anne-Marie, thank you so much. I feel like you just perfectly captured the mission and the vision that we have for the Deeply Rested podcast. And I want to ask all of you listening, if you are enjoying Deeply Rested, please take a few minutes to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I know it's super obnoxious to hear every podcaster making this request of you, but I'm learning just how important it is for the success of this podcast to get those reviews on Apple. The more 5-star reviews we have, the more likely the internet gods are to share our podcast far and wide with more small business owners who need to hear the anti-capitalist messages that we are sharing on this show. So thank you, Anne-Marie. And if you're interested in leaving us a 5-star review, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the instructions for just how to do that on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much in advance for sharing your love of this podcast with the world. And now, on to today's episode. Today's guest is Helida Dodd. She is a perfumer for lovers of beautiful fragrances who can't tolerate traditional perfumes. She's a former industrial engineer and uses her engineering and chemistry background to show you how luxury plus nature mix perfectly in a bottle. Helida is a speaker for organizations and groups and uses perfume as a sensorial component to teach critical thinking, create new habits, and form cohesive teams. I first met Ellie years ago in a writing group and have been completely enraptured by her magic and her wisdom and her entirely unique path to becoming a perfumer and an entrepreneur. This episode starts out with Ellie walking us through the non-linear path that she's traveled throughout her life that landed her here on this episode today. And I think there is so much wisdom to gain from listening to the journey other entrepreneurs have walked to land them in the perfect spot, the exact spot that they're meant to be in. So you're going to get to learn all about Ellie's journey as an entrepreneur. And then we get nerdy about scent, the science of scent, how to use scent as a form of self-care, and really unique ways you can weave the science of scent into your business to become more embodied, more deeply rested, focused, inspired. Basically, however you want to feel as a business owner when you're working, you can create that feeling using scent. And Ellie is going to tell you exactly how to do it in this conversation. So, light your favorite candle, give yourself a spritz of perfume, sit back, relax, and enjoy this wonderful conversation with perfumer Helida Dodd. Welcome to Deeply Rested, the podcast that helps people doing good work in the world take incredibly good care of themselves. I'm your host, retired therapist and disillusioned business coach, Megan Meganson. I'm on a mission to help people like you unlearn the rules that keep you trapped in self-doubt so that you can recover from burnout and finally become deeply rested. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and join our weekly newsletter at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. Now, it's time for the show. Helida, welcome to the Deeply Rested podcast.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. What a treat to be here with you.
It is so sweet to have you here. I can't wait to talk to you about scent and the senses and self-care. I'm so excited for this conversation. But before we dive in, I want to take a moment for us to ground together. So if you would, let's just slow down here and take 2 nice deep breaths.
You got it.
Tell me about the day that you quit your 9-to-5 job as an industrial engineer to become a full-time perfumer.
Oh my gosh. So you just gave me goosebumps. What a great question that is. The first time I actually quit my 9-to-5 industrial engineering job was not to become a perfumer. It was to become a full-time mom. So the mix of emotions I went through when I did that was unbelievable. And it's kind of funny to look back now. I think a couple months ago, I was just on the couch with my husband and saying, we make up all these stories in our heads, right? And I think at the time, I had no doubt, and we had prepared for this moment. We had lived on one salary for a long time and just said, when the time comes, if you want to quit, you can quit. If you want to go back, you can go back. And that was kind of the conversation we always had. I decided to quit cold turkey. No plan, nothing. I'm going to be a full-time mom. I went through some professional withdrawals and a moment of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm losing my identity. It's funny because now looking back, my son is now 20 years old. And looking back, I was like, what a load of crap that was, because I was not losing any identity. I'm not just a linear industrial engineer, but it felt like that at the time. Totally no regrets. I actually went back to work because one day, I think Jack was about maybe 18 months, and we used to have these lovely beach picnics every Friday. And we were coming back from the beach. I had put him down for a nap and the phone rings. It's that precious moment when your child finally goes to bed. And I'm picking up the phone and it's like, hello. And the voice on the other end kind of laughs and she's like, hi, I'm Jules Carrier and I'm calling from the president's office at Jackson. Do you have a moment? And it went on that the president wanted me to come back and work directly for him. And his reasoning was, I have seen a whole bunch of those projects that you've done and all those numbers. And I want somebody like you to give me those numbers. Because when I ask all my other directors to give me numbers, I feel like they're watered down. So I need an independent party basically like you. And I ended up going back to work. But that's a great memory. I mean, you totally caught me off guard. I was not thinking about that. But I love looking at that moment because I gave myself a lot of grief. If there's anything that I would change in my career, is that moment. Because I wouldn't give myself that much grief, because what has unfolded after that has been just a non-linear path that I would have never imagined otherwise.
Wow. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about that non-linear path, but I want to reflect back that I think what you're saying is you wouldn't have changed what happened in the moment, meaning that you quit your job so that you could stay home with your baby, but you wish you could go back and tell yourself a different story about the choice you were making.
100%. And not that oh my gosh, I loved that time that I had with Jack as a one-on-one, and we did all these fun things. So for a time, I had a heavy heart that I think was unnecessary. So I'm like, why did I give myself that grief? That I would do away with. But the decision to quit, I would do it all over again.
I really appreciate what you're saying in this reflection, that there was a fear that you were losing part of your identity. Right? That by walking away from this industrial engineering corporate job, that you were walking away from part of yourself. What you discovered over time, over years, was that you didn't lose any part of yourself. You were just in an evolution. You were becoming more of who you were supposed to be, and it required letting go of something that had been a part of your identity up to that point in time.
Oh my gosh, yes. Now that I look back, I think one of the things that I always say, I'm invited yearly to speak to a group of young girls in STEM. I always tell them, especially the girls in STEM that I think are very like I was at that point, very numerical, very scientific, and heavy sciences. I always tell them that they have to tap into their other parts. And by this, I mean their creative sides. Because I think we definitely all, especially as children, we're boxed into things, right? We're boxed into you're creative, you're artistic, you're sporty, you love math. You sort of adopt that label people give you, which is, it's not that it's negative, but I wasn't just good at math. I was also good at other things that I never thought I was. I would say things like, I'm not creative. I don't know how to draw. I'm like, I draw stick shifts. So, that's how I draw people. And I draw like a kindergartner. So I must not be creative. And I always tell the STEM girls how they are multidimensional, because you definitely tap into that science and math, but also tap into the other things, because you'll be surprised at how many answers I used to arrive by doing other things, right? Even when I'm sleeping, and I was maybe doing a complicated project, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's the answer. Like, that's the route we need to take. And I think those things happen when your brain is not so focused on performing, and you are dancing or painting or running or walking or just doing all those other things that are also part of you and fuel that one, your identity as we define it, right? When we think we're just a one thing, it's really not. It's fueled by many other things. And what I tell these girls is to really tap into their creative sides, that it's very present as well.
Wow. We are multidimensional. That's what I'm really grasping from the wisdom you are sharing right now. For you and your journey, the more you open yourself up to these other dimensions of yourself, especially the dimensions that you had some rigid stories around from earlier in your life, the more you open yourself up to those dimensions, the more robust your life becomes, the more nonlinear your path becomes, but also the more joy and creativity you start tapping into. Tell us about the transition from industrial engineer. You're working this 9 to 5, industrial engineer, heavy sciences. You are STEM all the way. You quit your job, go home, and connect and bond with your son, Jack, for 18 months. Then you get the call from your old boss, and he's like, I want you to come back. Did you come back as a consultant? Did you come back as an employee? What was the next step from that role into the work that you do now as a perfumer?
So I came back as a full-time job. And when I had Annabella, my daughter, I decided to stay. I had a little moment as well of, oh my gosh. But I said, fine, I'm not quitting cold turkey this time. I will stay in as an in-house consultant. And I did that for a while. And that hospital, it's pretty far from my house. I have another really big hospital closer by. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to send my resume and do consulting here. So I started doing consulting for that hospital. After a few projects, they wanted me to come back full time. I said, no, I don't want to have that full-time schedule, because I want to have the flexibility to drop off and pick up my kids and volunteer at their school. And for the next few years, some parts of our life had nothing to do with other parts, but it's unbelievable how everything is connected to where we are at the moment. So what I did was I went and I basically volunteered, which has been the hardest job I've done. Well, no, not the hardest job, but it was like full-time and a half volunteering in their executive boards and all of these things. And as part of the job, I got to do other things that now I'm using so much, because I had to do a lot of speaking. It wasn't the technical speaking that I had been doing up to this point, presenting projects and findings and data, but it was more of that connecting kind of speaking, connecting to people and explaining the bigger part of this organization and what it means, what this kids education meant, and being part of this group of parents or whatever it is that we were doing and fundraising for. And I get to do a whole bunch of things that I'm now doing. And it's kind of funny that now when I think about it, when I write my speeches, I have two very different sides that I use. I have a very connecting side that I use, and I used all those years when I was doing all that volunteering job. And then I also have the technical side, which is incredibly helpful because I have to speak about connecting with the brain and some data and some sciences to other things connecting with ourselves, because that is not really data driven, that it's a different kind of connecting. So I use all of that, and I did that for a while. When I was pregnant with Jack, my sense of smell I had really bad morning sickness where I didn't want to smell anything. So I went from loving perfume to basically banning perfume or any kind of scented products in my house. And it wasn't until we were on a trip and we went to have tea at Furnham and Mason, and then we just happened to go on their beauty floor. And I discovered that there were all these famous designers that were making perfumes with natural materials. And at my house, we love to concoct things, foods and whatever, you name it. I've been doing it. I kind of have that since my grandmother's time. She used to always add things to her beauty creams and whatever little secrets she had. We love doing that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, maybe I can finally go back to wearing perfume. What is this? I've been looking for 12 years and I haven't found something. And that sort of like sparked a thought, and it just went from there. And it took a little while. I think it took a lot of that daydreaming phase. And I think I always say like slaying the monsters, like all those fears. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a perfume. And then of course you're coming to a complete halt in other ways, or just, not really doing what you say you're going to do. So that went on for a little while. And I finally enrolled in a course in the UK. That was like going back to grad school. It was 3 years of formulating and studying. And if you think about it, it wasn't just learning that formulation and the science is part of it. But then now we're going into entrepreneurship. And it's a whole new language that I had to immerse myself in and learn. And marketing. I mean, I never took a marketing class when I was in undergrad. So it was all of that. And that was another 3 years, until the first formulation launched.
Do you remember the first perfume scent that you created?
Well, yes, it's the one that there's many variations. Actually, it changed a lot. I don't remember exactly which ones were going to be the components. I remembered, I realized like, oh my gosh, everything that I picked is the most expensive raw materials in the market. And this is not going to be sustainable. So I need to switch a little bit. So I think I might have switched. I think sandalwood was part of the original creation. And then that was left out and I switched it to another very soft wood. It was kind of in this direction of where I wanted it to go, but I definitely switched a few things. I added a few things. I invited my friend group to come and be my guinea pigs and give me feedback. And I think from there I switched a few things.
Did it connect to a memory for you, or was it just pure, like the sense that brought you pleasure? How did you arrive at your first scent creation?
So it's a little bit of everything, but the first one launched in 2021, so on the heels of COVID. So that whole COVID year, I was formulating and I was also doing a lot of writing. I live in Miami, and I always had in my head that we were getting back all those reports of kids getting depressed, being inside and being on screens all the time. So we had a rule that we had to go out and do something like walk or bike. And most days we would bike like 10 miles, and we would do short walks around my neighborhood too. And they would go and ride their little skateboards around. So a few years prior to that, we had gone to a back to school night, and Annabella's coach was very young. I think the first year out of college, and we're in his back to school night, and he starts giving us his presentation and all that. The first thing he says is that this is his first job out of college. And my husband and I look at each other, and I know what we're both silently thinking. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a train wreck, right? Like imagine 22 years old, just fresh out of college with this group of sixth graders. But he proceeds to give us the most amazing talk about how he's not teaching the kids physical education, but how every time they go through the doors, the person going through the door has to hold it for the one coming in the back, and the one in the back has to say thank you. And if they don't say thank you, they have to basically go back. He closes his speech saying, I just want these kids to understand that being present means where their 2 feet are. And I was like, oh my gosh, this 22-year-old, I mean, I loved his whole philosophy. The kids loved him. This was a while before COVID hit. So in those years, 2020 comes and we're doing our walks. I especially remember as soon as the school closes, right? We go on lockdown basically. And we don't know what to do with ourselves. And we're all right, let's go outside, let's go walk. And I'm super scared about everything. This teacher comes into my head and he's like, be present, like where your 2 feet are. And I'm looking in where my 2 feet are. Right in front of me are my 2 kids on skateboards. Is my husband walking the dog. We're healthy. We're okay. I know we're going to be okay. And I just kind of bring myself to that moment of, this is where my 2 feet are. And it's not so bad. And I think this is going to be my lifeline. You know, I'm going to stay in this moment as much as I can, or bring myself back to this moment when I feel like the terror coming on. So that drove the theme for the fragrance, you know, and it ended up being called, the name is Ever Present. But I also started noticing on my walks everything that was in my presence that I never even knew existed. There's a little bush of jasmines that doesn't flower all the time, so I probably missed all the times that it's flowered, right? But now I was looking at the little jasmine and smelling, and the ylang ylang tree just 2 houses down from me, from my neighbor, and he would come and when he realized how much I loved it, he would leave me cuttings of his flowers, you know, right outside my door. And just all those little things. And I started really tuning in to things that gave me joy, but not just joy, but also made me remember the levity, right? That lightheartedness, you know. We love fresh lemonade in my house in Nicaragua. It's always a part of it. And that's kind of how, so the whole theme was that, just noticing what's in front of you. And the other thing is, let's bring back a little lightheartedness into our lives. That's what really drove the creation of the fragrance.
Wow. What a story. I'm so moved listening to this. The name of the fragrance is Ever Present. And it arrived for you in a moment when presence was the medicine that you needed, that your family needed. And I'm just picture it, you walking down the street and all of a sudden your senses coming alive to everything around you, the plants, the flowers, the neighbors, and this mantra, this repeating to yourself, just be here, your 2 feet on the ground right now. And that when you did that, you could feel the fear fading off screen. What an incredible lesson. I just feel like I am learning so much right now receiving this story. And I also want to zoom out because I feel, as I'm listening to all of this, that there's this progression. It starts in the technical, it starts in the intellectual. And I love the way you own those gifts about yourself so unapologetically. You are a scientist. You are data-driven. People are like, we want Ellie. We want Ellie to be the person who's delivering information. Great. You're brilliant. Your brain is brilliant. But then you had kids and you stepped away from the workforce and you started paying attention to different layers, different dimensions of your life. Then you start volunteering, you start focusing on relationships, on more of the emotional, the connectedness between people. And then in the next season of your life, you take that even a layer deeper into your senses, into your own experience of embodiment and pleasure and sensuality. And you start creating perfumes. This scientist, this smart girl who was STEM all the way, finds her way into being an artist who is so deeply connected to the senses, and that you found an artistic outlet, perfume creation, which I know literally nothing about, but it's obviously this interconnection where you have to be a scientist and an artist and a relational being and connected to your senses. And then I get that flash of memory of your grandmother mixing different things into her beauty products. And it's like, oh, you can see the ancestral lineage for you of being this formulator, this creator, this person who is so deeply connected to the body. Wow, I'm in awe of your journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think one of the biggest surprises has been, well, you have no idea, even more than science, how much math there is behind the formulation, which for me has been a lovely find. But what I also realized
I love that
was,
for you, by the way.
I was like, whoa, there's numbers here. This is amazing. So industrial engineers, our engineering counterparts, call us the imaginary engineers. Because it is the softer kind. We do have to deal a lot with people. And I used to kind of be offended when I was an undergrad. Our t-shirts even said something about whatever, we're not the imaginary engineers, or, we were rebelling. And I had a moment that day when I was on the couch with my husband. We were having a few wines and, saying about what would you change? What would you change? And I said, oh, what is this about? Oh, I'm losing my identity. What? I said, if I'm an imaginary engineer. And it was funny because I didn't even say it. I'm an imaginary engineer in the way we had been referred to, but just like I'm an imaginary engineer, not practicing so much that side anymore. I mean, I do all the time. I'm always an engineer, but not getting paid like that. I actually love that I am an imaginary engineer because I love that people component. And I realized that was always the tie. My projects at the hospital, I remember my boss would be like, okay, but how did you find this out? And of course, I found it out because I took the time to get to know the people that I was working with. All those users that could basically take my numbers and put them in a drawer and never look at them again. They were implementing them because I had taken the time to get to know them. I had taken the time to understand what they needed. And it didn't matter if I spent 9 months working with them. They knew better what they needed and they knew better how they could change things. And I would always take the time to do that because of that people component, that connection. And in perfume, it's the same thing. Behind the numbers, when I'm working with a client, I'm trying to understand their perspective. So it's not about mixing scents that you love, but it's also about taking them to a memory. It's taking them to moods and feelings and what drives that. Like there's even layers beneath that, How do you want this perfume to make you feel? And you tap into stories that are absolutely delightful. And that is a huge connection. They're the biggest connections in the most technical way and in the most emotional way.
It's like what you said earlier, that often in life, we don't know how what's happening right now is going to be connected to where we are 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but it's all connected. And I find that to be one of the great joys in my life is the practice of going, okay, what got me here? And then being so surprised, oh my God, that random job I had in, 2007, I had forgotten about that. But now I can see how it led to this, which led to that, which led to there. And now I'm here. And it never would have happened if it wouldn't have been for that random thing from the past, because it's not random. And you can look back now and see that you've had this gift for relationship, for connection. You've had the gift for the beginning, and it's one of the through lines that's woven its way through your life and is now such a foundational component to your work as a perfumer.
100%. It's the best to look back and see those connections. There is no coincidence.
There's no coincidence. There's no coincidence, and there are no mistakes. I think when we really embrace the truth of those philosophies in our bodies, there are no coincidence and there are no mistakes. Every single thing that happened is exactly what was supposed to happen to get you to where you are right now. It's such a liberating feeling because we can just be present. We can be ever present when we trust that what's happening now is exactly what needs to be happening now. Even if it sucks, it is what needs to be happening right now. I love this so much, and I have 1,000 more questions about your journey and your take on life, but I want to steer the ship in the direction of scent, because I think that there's a lot of wisdom for business owners to gain from scent as a sensual practice, as a pleasure practice. You talk a lot in your work about scent being a form of self-care. How does that work exactly?
So the way that we process scents, so we don't smell through our noses, we smell through our brains.
What?
So
okay, say that again, please.
So we don't smell through our noses, we smell through our brains. The nose is just a conductor for those scent molecules to travel. When we smell something, they travel, and we have a sensorial bulb right here in between our eyebrows. And then it kind of goes on and resides in our limbic system. And our limbic system is where we store all of our memories, feelings, and emotions. And we start building scent memory since we are children. So scent, it's basically something that we associate with a moment. And it's very polarizing. So our sense of smell is very particular. It's very unique to who you are and what your experiences have been in life. When you love something, most likely it's associated with something positive. And a distant memory, an event, a place. We don't know. We're not conscious of these things as we go through life, but that's how we're building scent memory and all these connections to memory. It's the same when you don't like something. And it doesn't have to be tragic, but it could be something unpleasant. And I actually have a really funny story. Most people love vanilla, and I have a friend who said to me, she was one of my guinea pigs. She's like, as long as there's no vanilla in this, I'm good, because I hate vanilla. And I was like, you fine, don't worry. And she goes, when my sister was having birth, she had a home birth, and she decided to line her entire room with vanilla candles. And I was a teenager outside of that room, and the only thing I could smell was vanilla, and what I could hear was screaming, she said. She goes, I don't like anything with vanilla. The funny thing was that there was a tiny bit of vanilla in that mix that she was smelling, but when you mix something, you're coming up with a new chemical. It's barely noticeable because you have to use vanilla in formulation as you would when you're baking a cake. You have a teaspoon of vanilla. But when you love something, you love it. When you don't love it, you can almost feel a physical recoil. You wince or you have a physical reaction when you don't like a scent. And like I said, most likely it's tied to something unpleasant. Whatever that was, doesn't have to be tragic, but it's just something that you don't like it for a reason. And that's how unique our sense of smell is, and that's how powerful it is, because it's so unique to us and our experiences. So when you really pay attention and you find what is it that you love, and even better, why do I love this? It's kind of like a little, you're going to do a little sleuthing. You're like, oh, why do I love this? What is this connected to? What's the origin? I mean, some of them might be easy to find. Some of them might not be so easy. But that's a lovely component of scent because it is a superpower. You could use scent to energize. You could use scent to focus. You could use scent to just ground yourself and relax. And it's because it is really our brain connected to our sense of smell. And if we know how to tap into it, we could really use it to our advantage. There are some ingredients that are widely used for specific things. For example, your citruses are very uplifting and joyful and kind of happy. And your woods are going to be more grounding. What you love, I might not love. What you think is very sensual, and I might not think of that as that scent might not evoke those feelings for me. Some people love flowers, some people hate flowers, some people want sweet, some people don't want sweet. But again, that's the beauty of how specific our sense of smell is. So next time, for all the listeners, next time you go shopping for perfume, pay attention. Most likely they're going to like kind of the same families of perfumes, and pay attention to what you don't like. But especially think about what's that first memory that pops into your head. That's magical. Every time I'm analyzing raw materials or when I'm working with a client, it's fascinating to see that first reaction. So I always ask them, give me a word or a description or a memory or a feeling. I also like to go into other things that are not scent related, like textures and colors and shapes, or depending on the region, if we're working with the intent of a specific region, for example. I had a client from Italy and I said, okay, tell me about Lake Como. What does this remind you of? So we also work backwards. So if we're talking about sounds, tell me a sound in Lake Como. And this is going to be very personal to her. Her daughter was with us, and I love when I have kids with us because they're very unfiltered. I think as adults, we think like, oh, I have to say the right thing, and I'm not a perfumer. I don't understand this. But the beauty is that you don't have to be a perfumer because this is a gut reaction, right? So when I asked her daughter, so tell me about the sounds of Lake Como. And she said to me, the pebbles of the road as they crunch when the cars are driving. Wow. And then I hear the doorbell, and that means that my family is coming.
Oh.
Yes. You think it has nothing to do with scent, but it has so much to do with scent, but because we're also trying to create a mood. That's the first question I have for my clients. How do you want this scent to make you feel? And we get all these words. I mean, we get it from basically from A to Z, empowered, sexy, focused, grounded. I mean, you name it, and it's very particular. So our sense of smell is an incredible tool to use to our advantage, especially, I think, as entrepreneurs. We're busy, we're stressed. Sometimes we want to burn things to the ground.
I want to ask a question, and then we're gonna come back to that. We're heading in that direction. I have a question, just pure curiosity. How do I ask this? I love candles. And I have like candles that are my favorite scent, but I notice that as I'm burning them, I stop being able to smell them. And what's that about? Or it's like a perfume, right? If I wear a perfume, I get used to it or I can't smell it as much anymore. What's happening there?
That is very valid and a great question, by the way, because yes, your sense of smell gets saturated. If you have a candle burning right in front of you, your sense of smell is going to get saturated. I don't burn candles that much, so maybe that's why I haven't noticed it. But I do notice it when I'm doing sessions with clients. You can't go on a marathon smelling, 50 things. It's going to get saturated. And when you go shopping for perfume and they tell you to smell coffee beans to cleanse your palate, well, so I'll debunk that myth a little bit. I mean, yes and no, but honestly, the scent of coffee, it's also a scent. So what you want to do instead is, and sometimes I have seen this in some stores, you smell either a piece of paper towel, or if you don't have any perfume, you could smell the inside of your elbow, something that doesn't have any scent. And you kind of like just sort of cleanse your palate like that. But think about that when you go on a quest of finding the perfume. Break it up a little bit in smelling a few, 5. Then maybe take a little break if you're shopping, go have lunch or something, and then come back and do it over a few days. Your sense of smell does get saturated.
Yeah, it gets saturated, and then it sounds like you need a different scent to come in. We need to be stimulated in different ways.
But not overly saturating it with like another equal, or maybe, I don't know, you're going to have to tell me what happens if you burn a different kind of candle. Do you smell that?
Yes.
Either that or step away for a moment and drink water. Water actually helps if you want to continue having that candle. That's a great thing to use for scent and for relaxing, focusing, or creating habits, a ritual. That's a wonderful way to do it. With a scent, you're basically anchoring if you're doing habits or you want to get a new routine, you're anchoring that moment to a scent. So that scent will trigger your brain into, okay, it's time to fill in the blanks here. So that's a great way to anchor a habit.
Okay. I'm going to weave together what you're saying with something that I do in my own practice and with my clients, because I think something is coming together here that is blowing my mind. So I have a background as a sex therapist. In my practice as a sex therapist, I did a lot of research and exploration around pleasure, specifically non-erotic pleasure, sensual pleasure that we experience through being connected to the 5 senses, including scent, things that we hear, things that we touch, things that we taste, anything that we experience through the senses that create an experience of pleasure in our bodies. In my work with business owners, I have found that it is such an important part of the way that we rest, right? That in order to be deeply rested, we have to do lots of different things. We have to exercise, we have to move our bodies, we have to create art, and we have to sleep, and we have to experience pleasure. pleasure is so critical to be fully embodied. Pleasure is the experience of being embodied in so many ways. And this is where we can really tap into profound wisdom as business owners through the wisdom through the body. Okay, so I love candles. I haven't really been a person who's worn a lot of perfume because I don't know, maybe I just haven't found the right perfume. And also I find that my scent gets saturated really easily, but I love candles. I've always thought about candles through the sensual pleasure component that like I love looking at the flame, right? I love beautiful ceramic jars. I love the scent. It kind of brings me alive in my body. But now you're bringing in this emotional memory component that is like, whoa, it's really taking this to a whole new level. If I'm tracking correctly, because our nose is just a conduit for scent to go up and be processed in the brain, and because the place where it is being processed in the brain is also where we house memories and emotions, like you're saying, we cannot unlink scent from memory. And that when we're bringing scent into our lives, into our environments, we are evoking memory, we're evoking emotion. And to use scent as a form of self-care, we want to start getting curious about what kind of scents spark or trigger different types of sensations and emotions and memories so that we can match a memory with the kind of environment I'm trying to create for myself right now. Am I getting this right?
I'm going to hire you.
Holy cannoli. This is big. This is big. So for example, if I'm trying to calm down after an energizing day, I need to pick a scent that reminds me of calm, right? That reminds me of rest.
Absolutely. Or it just makes you feel that either reminds you of a moment, or what do you equate to rest? What do you equate to that rest that you want? You're definitely on the right track. It's not just a memory, it's also that, that just happens naturally. You cannot even arrive there through work, right? Like, oh, I'm going to work to feel like this. It's almost like it's happening.
Yeah, but
it's
are we paying attention to it?
Right.
Are we being curious about it? That's what I'm really taking from what you're sharing, is that there is a way in which if we can bring a little intentionality and curiosity to our experience of a scent, we can learn a lot about ourselves. The therapist part of me is like, whoa, so like scent is like a whole other layer of shadow work that we can do, right? To explore the sense that we have negative reactions to, and what's that about, okay?
Absolutely. I love this nerdiness because it is so true. But honestly, one of my favorite things is when people tell me, oh, I love, and this is one of my favorite ones because it's a very polarizing scent, patchouli. I don't personally love patchouli, but there are people who absolutely adore patchouli. It's
people wonderful. Who love patchouli.
Yeah.
Patchouli is a lifestyle.
Totally. It's my favorite one. I'm always thinking like I could never... I mean, yes, of course, I will formulate with patchouli for somebody who likes patchouli, and that fragrance is there bespoke. Perfect. But what I love is when my clients tell me, I love patchouli. And since just up to recently, it was not really in the materials that I bring to the first meeting or anything, because it's not one of my loves. So I don't think about bringing it. But I had 2 clients back to back who had told me they love patchouli. So I said, alrighty then, we're just gonna go down this route. And I went and I sourced 6 different ones. Patchouli light, patchouli dark, patchouli organic, patchouli this, patchouli... I mean, 6 different ones. Not completely different, but very different scent profiles. So I bring them to the clients, that are saying that they absolutely adore patchouli. And I get there and they're like, no, I don't like this. It was funny because I think there's a few reasons why. And now granted, this is the real natural version, right? I brought the aroma chemical ones, which are the ones that have been in a more controlled environment created, right? And that's different. And I think that's the patchouli that they maybe were associating with that love. Because I think also, if you think about it, marketing has shaped our perception of scent. So a lot of people smell citruses and tell me, oh, this reminds me of pledge. I don't like it. That's because that's what they equate, like the cleaning products, some of that. Some of our associations might be through that. Some of our other associations might be through the perfumes that we buy that tell us, oh, this is this. And we don't know any better, right? But that's okay. That's not a negative thing. You just still find that scent that you love and that it makes you feel. This makes me feel so happy and so energized. And I just want to go, dancing right now or clean my house. That's what's important to pay attention to. Do you love this? That's like the first question. Oh, yeah, I love it. Why do I love it? And, that's like the little bit of self-discovery. And then, or just maybe take a whiff of something and just pay attention. Where does that bring you? The stories that unravel from something that you love, I could never make that up. It is just absolutely...
Well, it's like the little girl, right? Saying
yes.
The sound of the pebbles crunching beneath the tires and the doorbell ringing means my family is here. And that your magic is saying, let me help you create a scent that brings your memory back to that moment of your family walking through the door. And we're taking that a giant step further by saying, okay, how can we weave scent into our businesses, right? As business owners, how can we use scent to bring us back to ourselves? And as we start moving towards the end, even though I feel like I could keep talking with you about this for hours, I want to bring it to this point because what we're trying to do with this podcast is help business owners step away from capitalism, from patriarchy, from the oppressive systems in the world that have convinced us that we need to do more, be more, accomplish more, make more money, right? It's all about this external gain. And to step away from those systems requires coming into the body, coming into the self. And you, Ellie, are offering us a pathway here to come back into self through scent. I am so thrilled at how accessible this is, how accessible you can go to whatever store is closest to your house and smell the candles and smell the perfumes, but do it with more intention and more curiosity, right? What does this scent evoke? Is it a good memory? Is it a good feeling? Is it a negative feeling? And let's think as business owners, how do I actually want to feel when I'm working inside of my business? I want to feel grounded, inspired, creative, rested. Okay, go find a scent that brings that alive in your body and let those scents be your new coworkers and see what happens. Am I getting this right? I want to make sure I'm not.
100%. And you don't even have to go to the store. You can just go outside. And you know what's funny?
Oh my God, you can go outside because nature has smells. That's where they come from.
And it's not even...
Great reminder. Oh my God, look at... I just happened to me. I was like, I got to go buy something. No, I can walk outside.
But it's not even just the flowers or the fruits on the trees. Think about one of my favorite scents. It's the scent of earth after it rains.
Yes.
And it brings me right back to my childhood. I grew up on a farm riding horses, and I can go back in a second. It is like time traveling. Just as a funny note, when my kids used to ask, we used to play all kinds of crazy games, and they'd be like, oh, if you had a superpower, what would that be? And then my superpower was always to teleport. Well, I can tell you that I have found a way to teleport. It is definitely through scent. It is quick. It is before you even realize what's happening, you go to that moment. And for me, it's that. But I've also heard, which I love, I was just working with a client and she said, oh my gosh, this reminds me of the first day it snows and the sound, like the crunching of the snow under my feet. There's a scent everywhere because some people tell me about the crisp air, the way it smells. Of course, the smell of grass. Pay attention because there are scents in more ways than the common ways, than the ones that you think of first. And the beautiful thing is that once you start paying attention, more ways start just kind of revealing themselves to you.
Let's come back to multi-dimensions, right? That we are multi-dimensional, that we exist at the intersection of multi-dimensions. And this reminder is so powerful that if you just pause and breathe you can become aware of so many more dimensions than you are aware of when you're operating in the grind of capitalism. It's do, be, earn. That's very narrow, very linear, very one-dimensional, and scent can open us up to so much more. I hope I never forget this, what you're saying right now. I went and grabbed the candle that was burning behind me because this has been my work candle for a while. And I'm like, oh, what is it? Okay, it's Northern Wilderness, drifts of wild sage and cedarwood. And it's true. It makes me feel like I'm in the forest. And I had never thought about that being on purpose. Okay, I'm doing a podcast interview. How do I want to feel? I want to feel grounded. I want to feel focused, but I also want to feel connected to nature. I want to feel like there's wisdom flowing through this conversation that is beyond either of our comprehension. And smell can be a vehicle to connect us to the unseen. Helida, you are magical. What you're doing, this incredible weaving of science and creativity and magic and relationship and emotion and memory and senses and embodiment. I mean, it is like such medicine for all of us. And I'm so grateful that we were able to put it through the lens today of entrepreneurship and how can we use this magic in our whole lives, but also in our businesses so that we can be more deeply rested and connected to ourselves. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for having me. It's just so fun to be here with you and to talk about this.
Can you please tell the people where they can learn more about you and the work you are doing in the world?
Absolutely. You can go to my website. It's marbellaperfumes.com, like the city in Spain, Marbella.
Can you spell?
Yes, Marbella, perfumes.com. And my Instagram handle is the same, Marbella Perfumes. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
We're going to put all of those links in the show notes. Anything else that you want to share or you want people to know about before we wrap up for today?
Join me on my emails. We talk a lot about not just scent, but also what drives scent. From memories to travel to behind the scenes. I feel like it's a very special way of learning the different facets, the multidimensional of this perfume making.
Definitely sign up for the email list. You are an incredible storyteller, an incredible human, and I'm just so grateful that you joined us to talk about scent, but also thank you for sharing your non-linear journey. That is a through line on this podcast I'm discovering is having a space for us to share the magic that happens when you let life unfold in its own magical, mysterious way. So just as much as I'm taking away wisdom about scent and ways I'm going to be weaving scent into my business, I'm also feeling really inspired by the way you have let life lead you to this moment, to this path of entrepreneurship. So thank you for all of your wisdom. And I hope that we can talk to you again on the Deeply Rested podcast in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan, for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.